Welcome to Author Stories, the podcast where we talk to the best writers in the industry and discuss writing and the creative process. Whether you're a writer, a reader, or both, we hope you'll find something here that makes you love books and the writers that create them. You can find archives of all of the great conversations I've had with authors over the years at hankgarner.com. Take some time and browse around there. I'm sure you'll find a new author to love, find inspiration for your own creative life, and find a new story to get lost in. Let's thank some sponsors who make the show possible. No Good Deed, Book 1 of the Mark Taylor Psychological Thriller series by M.P. MacDonald, is free on Amazon.com. Seeing the future comes at a price. What price would you be willing to pay to save thousands of lives? Mark Taylor knows his actions scream guilty, but he was only trying to stop the horrible terrorist attack. Instead of a thank you, the government labels him an enemy combatant and throws him in the brig with no rights, no trial, and no way to prove his innocence. He learns firsthand that the CIA can do anything they want to him, anything at all. Mark's just a regular guy, a photographer, who finds himself in an extraordinary situation when an antique camera he buys at a dusty Afghanistan bazaar produces photographs of future tragedies he's driven to prevent. His frantic warnings about September 11th are ignored, but put him in the government crosshairs when he learns what being labeled an enemy combatant really means. Download this intense and gripping thriller now, free on Amazon. No Good Deed, Book 1 of the Mark Taylor Psychological Thriller series by M.P. MacDonald. As the Crow Flies, enter Haddon Wood, Book 1 by Risa Walker and Caleb Ansel. From Risa Walker, the award-winning author of the best-selling Kronos Files, and debut author Caleb Ansel, comes a chilling story of altered reality and psychological terror. Chase Ray sits perfectly still, his thumbs traveling across the screen of the broken computer tablet, stuck in the nexus between two worlds. Haddon Wood isn't real. It can't be. Another world, another reality, hovers just beyond his reach. He can see it sometimes. He can almost touch it. In that world, things are in balance. The dead stay dead and the creature feature remains safely on the screen. That world isn't a patchwork quilt of every scary book or movie he's seen. In that world, the nightmares generally end when you open your eyes and people don't glitch in and out of existence. Chase is determined to return to that world, although he's a bit worried that the only way out is through the noose that seems to lurk around every corner. He needs allies to get back home. But how do you choose your team when you can't tell who's real? As the Crow Flies, enter Haddon Wood, Book 1 by Risa Walker and Caleb Ansel. We're so happy to have our friend Crystal Pico Watanabe as a sponsor of the show. Crystal is one of the best editors in the business, and she has just debuted a new service that I think you'll absolutely love and will help you to up your writing game. Pico's School of Wordcraft and Editing has just debuted, and the first course is called Properly Punctuating Dialogue. It's a mini course and can be completed in just about 20 minutes. It covers the basics of dialogue punctuation. Authors can get access to the new school and the course for free by signing up for Crystal's author newsletter, Notes from Pico. Go to picoshouse.com/newsletters. That's picoshouse.com/newsletters. More in-depth courses will be added in 2020. Make sure you don't miss a thing. picoshouse.com/newsletters. Unwilling Souls by Gregory D. Little. Books 1 and 2 are only 99 cents for a limited time. The gods are rightfully imprisoned, and Cess intends to keep them that way. But her terrorist father has other plans. Gregory D. Little's Unwilling Souls is a pulse-pounding chase through an epic fantasy world of adventure, sinister conspiracy, and a magical industrial revolution fueled by harvested human souls. Cess is the daughter of powerful parents who would very much like to kill one another and who therefore pretend she doesn't exist. An apprentice jailer of the gods, Cess spends her days learning to forge the tools needed to maintain the gods' prison. When her terrorist father attacks the prison on her 16th birthday, Sess is forced to flee after the secret of her parentage is revealed. Suddenly on the wrong side of the law, Sess realizes the very father who abandoned her may be the only one who can protect her. But some secrets are darker than parentage. On her way to find her father, Sess will uncover truths about her family and herself that will shatter her understanding of the world and risk the return of the gods themselves. Unwilling Souls and its sequel, Ungrateful God, are on sale now for only 99 cents. The third book of the series is coming early next year, so now is the perfect time to get up to speed. Unwilling Souls by Gregory D. Little. Books 1 and 2, only 99 cents for a limited time. Thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today I'm super excited to have Robin Cook back on the show with me. Last year we talked about his amazing book, Pandemic. He's got a brand new book out now called Genesis, and I have to tell you, Robin, when I get one of your new books, it's always with a little bit of trepidation that I put it on my nightstand, because I know I'm going to lose sleep because of, the way you tell a story. But, I'm also going to be a little nervous as I go through the world, because you always expose things that honestly just, kind of scare the crap out of us. So thank you for doing what you do, and welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be here again.
Yeah. Robin, last year we talked about Pandemic, and, it was about this time of the year, and we're all thinking about flu season and all of that kind of stuff. And you painted a scenario that everyone that read your book had to have in the back of their mind as they went through that winter and early spring, where everyone is cautious of shaking hands and all of that stuff. But since then, in regular conversations, I've heard about CRISPR, just at weird times. It's like we got this cultural, this thing kind of seeped into the culture in our conversation. How do you feel about, when topics that you raise and you bring attention to start getting widespread attention?
Well, I knew it was going to happen because it really is quite an amazing leap ahead, if you will, in terms of being able to edit genes as easily and as accurately as it seems to afford. So I knew that was going to be the case. What I also knew is I knew that there was a great risk that Chinese researchers might violate the voluntary abstention from using CRISPR-Cas9 on human embryos. And lo and behold, it happened just as I was fearful it would happen. And indeed, almost at the same time that the book came out, there was a Chinese researcher who admitted that he had used CRISPR on some ovum, and so that there are a couple of young one-year-olds, I guess now, who have been subjected to CRISPR in terms of their hereditary. And it's worrisome to wonder exactly how those children are going to develop.
You began your writing career back in the 70s and literally defined a genre with the medical thriller. Still writing, 40 years later, and still coming up with these gripping plots and engaging characters. How has the writing process changed for you in those 40 years? I can only imagine that the research aspects of it are more dynamic and things easily at our fingertips like never before. But has the writing changed?
No, that's still a stress. It's not easy to do. It seems and it looks easy when after you've put in a lot of effort and it reads so easily, it seems like it must just sort of flow out. Well, it doesn't quite. It's actually it's a lot of work. Writing is a lot of work, and in fact, you become exhausted when you write, which is strange because you're just sitting there. But my feeling is that writing requires you to use more sections of your brain simultaneously than just about anything else we do. You're not only using the motor areas of your brain, your sensitivity areas, but also your memory, and not only just your memory in terms of events, but memory in terms of emotions, et cetera, et cetera. So a huge area of your brain is all firing away, I guess, and I think that's what makes writing difficult, and why it's so hard sometimes to actually get yourself to sit down and start. You think of all sorts of other things. Oh, gosh, I didn't pay that electric bill. I better do that. Oh, well, wait a minute. Maybe I should sweep off the walk. I saw some leaves on the walk. I mean, it's amazing all the things you think about, and then have to force yourself to sit down to write. I believe it's that. I believe it's the fact that it requires you use more areas of your brain. At writing, you use a lot more areas of your brain when you write than when you read, and you use even less when you watch. So that's anyway. I've thought about that a lot because I've wrestled with my discipline sometimes when I'm in the middle of a book, and sometimes it's a little hard to actually get going.
I think a lot of writers can commiserate with you there, that the act of writing sometimes leaves you physically spent, and people that don't write may not quite understand that, but it takes all of your person at times to connect with all of those elements, and it can be physically exhausting.
It is. It's surprising because you're surprised yourself because you've just been sitting there, and then why do I feel so tired? And then I guess it's just that our brain is our center of not only thought but it's a sensation, and the sensation of being tired. So it's your brain, and if your brain is the thing that's been working so hard, no wonder you feel tired.
Right. You mentioned a moment ago the emotional aspects of storytelling and connecting with the story in a way that the reader is going to connect. I think that's one thing that sets your books apart and that makes them so scary to read, if you will, is that we can read the newspapers or watch the news any day, and there are plenty of things out there to scare us. But you take those things and find a way to emotionally connect me as a reader to that thing that I may or may not have known about. But it becomes very real, and there are very real stakes at play. Could you talk a little bit about taking the idea and then finding ways to emotionally connect with us?
Well, I think we're more alike than we are different in so many different ways. And so I use myself as kind of the gauge. And I want to get really pulled into the story myself. And I feel if I'm able to do that with myself, that I'll be able to do that with the reader as well. So I really use myself as a gauge. And I realize that I like to be involved in a story, and I can feel it when I'm writing, and I can actually feel being really involved. It's a mystical kind of thing, and Genesis has a good example of this. Right in the first page of Genesis is rather unique, where I describe an episode of human fertilization, and I describe it in kind of a microscopic way, and I spent a lot of time writing that page, and I think a lot of people will have that same feeling when they read that page, because human fertilization might be the most extraordinary thing in the entire universe. That the fact that it works. We all are so familiar with it because it happens so often. In fact, when I Googled it, it found out it happens about 350,000 times a day. So no wonder we get a little bit blasé about it. But when you think about it, the way I wrote it in that first page, and that's where the title Genesis comes from, because it's the creation of another human being, and the fact that it happens when just that egg and that sperm get together, and all of a sudden, how can it have all the information to create a single human brain that might be the most complicated thing in the universe? It's extraordinary because no other information goes into those little tiny little dots, and yet it has all the information in there to create billions of molecules. And every molecule in our body is so unique, and it has to be just right, otherwise it all doesn't work. And it has to just have the right amino acids. It's fascinating. It's fascinating, and it's that kind of feeling. All right, now can I convey that to the reader? And I spent a lot of time on that first page of Genesis, and I'll be really interested to hear how many people are drawn into that and really have a sense of that mystery.
Oh, I was immediately hooked. The way that you can take the super complex, and yes, we're blasé to it because it's literally something we've all lived through to get here, and we just take for granted. Yet it's so difficult to not see the miracle that is just happening, and we can't wrap our head around it. But then you take that and you drop it in my lap in a way that I have to keep turning pages. There's and it's your own fault that you make it look so easy. That we think, I can do that. But I would imagine that you probably wrote and rewrote that first intro to the book. How important is that to really grab that hook at the beginning?
I personally think it's very important because it is with me too. When I read not only my own books but other books, if I want to get drawn in, I want to be emotionally somehow connected, somehow associated with my own life and my own person. And if the writer is clever enough to be able to do that, that's when we really get immersed in a story and immersed in a book, and not only is it the most fun, but you get the most out of it. So I really make a big effort on doing that, and I probably make more of an effort now than I did when I first started. I didn't really think about it that much when I first started writing, especially with my first book. I was just, I was not a writer. I'd been a chemistry, math, physics major. I didn't take English and all those other courses that would have helped me. So I was just like I was in a dark room, bouncing around.
What I love about your books is that you can take some new cutting edge technology that piques our interest, and then weave that into some completely normal everyday situation, and then watching the sparks fly as those things converge is always fun. In the book Genesis, there are a couple of really kind of hot button issues that you touch on. In the beginning of the book, you really touch on the opioid crisis and our response to that, even though it turns out to not be what we expect. But then this hot button issue of DNA, and if you're a follower of true crime stories, podcasts, TV shows, that sort of thing, you know how important DNA testing has become to the criminal justice system. But then there's also the issues of privacy, as those of us who like to do genealogy and track our family roots. This is a new technology that's becoming very mainstream, and again, we're kind of becoming blasé about it because such neat things are happening with it. When did this topic really grab your attention, and when did you see the potential for a story in it?
It was when the Golden State Killer was caught in 2018, and it really captured my imagination. And I suddenly gave ancestry DNA or genetic DNA much more attention. And prior to that, I thought, well, it's mostly for people who want to learn about their ethnicity and whether they're from Europe or Scandinavia or Mexico or wherever. And that's sort of interesting, I think, to some people. To me, I didn't care because I sort of know that I'm just a mongrel.
Right, as a lot of us are.
Yeah, and so I didn't care, and nor do I think I'm related to any royalty, which I think a lot of other people sort of have ideas that perhaps they are or something. I don't know, but that never interested me that much. And but suddenly this efficacy of actually capturing a ne'er-do-well, a perpetrator, a criminal, after 30 years of being on the lam and having murdered and raped so many people and thumbed his nose at the law enforcement in California, and then to essentially retire and be in retirement, so to speak, and then to catch him. It just really caught my imagination, and I thought, well, there's more to this than what I was thinking, and it's not just about ethnicity. It's about relating individual people, and so I was fascinated, and I saw that they had found a third cousin, and I never paid much attention to that kind of stuff. I don't have a very big family. And I sort of vaguely had an idea of what a cousin was and a second cousin. Not really. And so it's a whole bunch of stuff that I realized that I could learn. And so that was the part of the challenge. But the real hooker was the fact that they caught this Golden State Killer and subsequently have caught some other ne'er-do-well perpetrators. But it's always with having the individual's DNA and then trying to find that individual. Genesis is a little bit different, is they don't have the perpetrator's DNA. They have the DNA of an embryo that he is the father of, and therefore they have half of his DNA because they also have the DNA of the mother, and they can essentially subtract the DNA of the mother from the kid's DNA. So that DNA is half the DNA of the father. And then I learned that there are some very interesting statistical methods where you can even construct what they call an evil twin. I don't know why they call it evil twin, but anyway, what it is they have the actual embryo, and they have the embryo's DNA, and so they have half the father's. Well, what about the other half of the father's DNA? And so let's construct a make-believe child with the other half of the DNA. So what would that look like? And and there's statistical methods of actually doing that and getting fairly close. And anyway, I found it really fascinating. I thought that everyone is going to find it fascinating, particularly those people who have already sent their DNA in and have become very conversant with genetic DNA. They're going to really have a lot of fun with my novel because they'll realize that, yes, this is exactly how they do it and exactly what to do, and and but also people who haven't sent their DNA in. And I wouldn't be surprised if Genesis really encourages a lot more people to go ahead and do it, because the larger the reservoir of people who send their DNA in, as that gets larger, and now it's sort of 15 to 20 million. If it goes up even much more than that, the more people involved, the more accurate it becomes. So there's a stimulus.
Yeah. Arthur C. Clarke said that any technology that is advanced enough will seem like magic to the people that are exposed to it. When you're dealing with new technologies like this, there's an aspect of that where, as a writer, you can just kind of make the technology do whatever you want it to do because so few people, know really what's going on. But those, you can't hold that for very long because the way things are advancing and becoming common knowledge. How do you learn about new technologies like this, and what's your research process like so that you do get the science right while not just beating us over the head with it?
Well, that's part of the benefit of my background because I was a chemistry, math, physics major, so that does help me in terms of basic science. That helps, and but also I'm very diligent, and in fact that was my adjective. I was part of one time, a long time ago, a Time magazine article, and my sobriquet was diligent, and so I do spend a lot of time, and I'll just if I can't figure it out at first, I'll just keep at it until I kind of figure it out. And of course I do have the benefit of a background as a physician, and I did learn quite a bit about DNA when I was in medical school and have continued that even more than my fellow doctors the same age as I spent a lot more time staying up to date in the basic sciences than they did. I've always been able to, I could tell that. It's just part of my interest. And I get to use these in all these novels that I've written and will write. I never wanted to be a writer, but or I never thought about being a writer. Well, that's not quite true. Actually, in the third grade, I decided I didn't like the way Stuart Little ended, and so I wrote an addendum to Stuart Little so that he found Margot again. And but other than that, I was not going to be a writer. But I got into medical school and realized that medicine was changing in many ways. First of all, it was changing in a bad way in the sense it's being taken over by business. And second, it was changing because of the advancement of science. And people didn't know very much about it at that time. And as more science was going, they're going to get know even less. And how can I bridge that? And that was when I had the idea of using entertainment, fiction, and movies, etc. Not just to entertain, but also to get people to learn something about medicine that might affect their lives somehow. Back then, for instance, one of my major goals was to frighten people about hospitals. And when I was in medical school, people would say things like, "Oh, I'm so exhausted, I think I should check myself into a hospital." My feeling is that's the worst possible thing to think you do. You want to stay away from the hospital. The hospital is the scariest place in town. And so that's actually what I accomplished with my second book, Coma. People suddenly said, maybe I don't want to go to the hospital.
Right. In Genesis, you You bring us back to some familiar faces and characters like Laurie Montgomery, the chief medical examiner, but we also get to meet some new folks, Dr. Aria Nichols especially. Tell us about Aria. Where did she come from, and what does she bring to the book?
Well, I like to have my characters really create the story rather than the story kind of drag the characters along. And so I needed somebody, first of all, was not a yes person, somebody that was an independent thinker, and someone who maybe had a chip on her shoulder about men. In fact, she doesn't like men. And it reflects in her decisions, and she doesn't like patients either, and that's how she ends up in pathology. Because if you're a pathologist, you don't have to deal with patients unless you just deal with the microscope and whatnot. And so I had to make her. She had a difficult childhood. She's been abused, and not only by her father, but abused by her only boyfriend in college, and so she doesn't like men, and it's not that she's lesbian. She's just nothing at this stage, and but it's critical because she's the one that sort of takes on herself to find out who is the father of this little embryo, and why hasn't the father appeared or surfaced when his obvious girlfriend overdosed, and what kind of role did he play in terms of her overdose? Did he supply the drugs? So she really decides that she's going to find this out, and then she bumps into the idea of using genetic genealogy. She hadn't thought about it before, but it's presented to her as an idea, and she latches onto it, and so that's how the story sort of starts and how it's propelled, and because she has to make a certain amount of effort, and if she wasn't, she gets progressively irritated that this lover of this individual, where is he? Why doesn't he show up? Why doesn't he? How could this young woman have rotted away in her apartment for 3 days before she's discovered? Why didn't the boyfriend know about it and whatnot? So, but isn't that a very realistic kind of set of circumstances? That's what I like to create. I like to create something that really makes sense to me and could very, very well happen. So it really reads true, and it's not a series of coincidences.
Right.
It comes out of her personality.
Well, and the character of Dr. Nichols, Aria, she's kind of an antagonistic protagonist, but you really make us love her in how she's fighting for her patients, even though they're passed away. I love the way that you make us care for her in seeing her care for the people around her.
Yeah, you realize that there's multiple levels to this kind of thing, because in actuality, if you met her, you probably wouldn't like her. But now that you're sort of inside her, you realize that, like everyone, she has some good aspects as well as some bad ones, and that's the way we all are to some degree. And so it makes it very realistic. It makes it, to me, I enjoy that when I come across it in my reading. When I read other people's books, I like to have a sense that this really seems very, very real. This could happen this way, and in fact, you think it does. When you read Genesis, it really doesn't read as fiction somehow. It reads as nonfiction. That's why I called originally I called my writing faction, because so anyway.
Well, the new book is called Genesis. It's available everywhere now, hardcover, Kindle edition, and audio book. Robin, thank you so much for taking time to come back on the show today. We're going to put links to the book and to your website in the show notes of this episode, and we wish you much success on the book.
Well, thank you. And I have to say that the one thing I wish is that I wish I had a better connection to all my readers to really hear or feel or find out how they respond. That's the struggle. But, it's one of the things that I have a fan page on Facebook, and I really relate to my fan people on that, and I get a lot of feedback from my readers, and that's really fun.
We will send everyone to your Facebook page as well, and would love to continue the conversation there.
Thank you.
No use crying over spilled milk. Eliza hated that cliche. She'd grown up a cliche, her life a bowl of cherries, duck soup, easy as pie, child's play behind a white picket fence. Mother had been the Wyatt Earp of cliches, firing them off quick draw. A rotten apple spoils the barrel. Smile and the world smiles with you. Every dog has his day. Children should be seen and not heard. She believed them all, particularly this last. Eliza obliged, preferring to wander the streets of Wytheville, Virginia on her own lonesome terms. The divorce left Laura a spinster librarian, and one false step on icy stairs left her an invalid as well. The accident happened on New Year's Eve, 1950. Laura had just locked the doors of Wytheville Public Library. "We must make black-eyed peas tomorrow," Laura had been thinking, "with turnip greens." That ensured a lucky new year, and if you swept some money over your threshold, a prosperous one, too. She loved those old Southern traditions. She looked both ways, checking for Negroes, but turned to heel on the icy marble of the stairs and fell into the bushes below, breaking the long bones in both legs. Eliza had taken advantage of her mother's absence. She'd lost her virginity that same night. She'd swept Ron Partridge over her threshold, initiating her own beloved tradition. She was nursing a hangover, giddily reliving the event, but around 8:30 she realized that her mother had not come down to breakfast. She checked her mother's bedroom, found it empty, took the bus down to the library, climbed the high stairs, knocked hard on the library doors, and heard a groan below. Laura lay under the William Penn barberry bushes, below the yellow-trimmed windows of the non-fiction section. Her white stockings ran Jezebel red with blood. Sweat and melted snow had soaked her blouse, and her gray forehead blazed. The broken bones didn't kill Laura Merrick. She lay in the hospital, wheezing, her legs mortared up in casts. She had few visitors after the first week. Her church group was glad to fret over a poor thing for a day or two, but they trickled away when Laura had the bad manners to linger. On Valentine's Day, as her mother slept, Eliza drew big, sloppy hearts on her casts. Laura harumphed when she woke and insisted on keeping her legs hidden beneath blankets afterwards. But in late March, something miraculous happened. Laura's self-control dropped. She ranted at nurses, spit at doctors, swore like a Navy pilot dropping F-bombs on Hiroshima. She had dementia, the doctors said. Eliza decided that her mother had just stopped believing her own bullshit. The spells continued over the next 2 weeks, and Eliza enjoyed her mother's company for the first time. They swapped bawdy jokes, ogled the handsome interns, and chattered like best girlfriends late into the evening. They had long conversations, and Laura spoke her own mind in her own words about things that mattered to her. It broke Eliza's heart when the prim, condescending librarian returned. Laura hardly acknowledged anything that had passed between them. The cliches returned. You can't have your cake and eat it too. A leopard doesn't change its spots. Nothing is certain except death and taxes. This last proved true. On April 15th, Laura Merrick marked her Bible with a tongue depressor, set it on her nightstand, leaned back against the headboard, and coughed blood down the front of her nightdress. Eliza found her that way, dead as the proverbial doornail, and yes, the blood was thicker than water, just as her mother had always said. Much thicker than water, in fact, perhaps as thick as molasses in January.